Commander Zrel stood before the holographic display in his war room, his 4 eyes examining the blue planet that rotated slowly in the projection. The world looked peaceful from space, covered in swirling white clouds and vast oceans. It was the 3rd planet from a yellow star, located in a quiet corner of the galaxy that most civilized species ignored. "This one will be easy," Zrel said to his officers. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had conquered 47 star systems in 300 years. "They call themselves humans. They have barely left their own planet." And, cresting Prom, his second-in-command, Officer Krath, pulled up the intelligence report. The data showed primitive spacecraft, nuclear weapons that were laughably weak compared to Vectar technology, and a divided population that spent more time fighting each other than looking to the stars. "They have no unified planetary government," Krath said. "Over 200 separate nations, constantly arguing with each other. They have fought thousands of wars among themselves. Their technology is at least 500 years behind ours." Zrel clicked his mandibles together in satisfaction. The Vectar Dominion had perfected the art of conquest. They would arrive at a new world, send a message demanding surrender, and wait exactly 24 hours. If the species refused, the Dominion would demonstrate their power by destroying a major city. After that, resistance always crumbled. The strategy had worked on every world they had encountered. Some species tried to fight back, but none had the technology to challenge Vectar warships. Most simply surrendered after seeing the first demonstration of power. It was efficient, clean, and quick. "Prepare the standard ultimatum message," Zrel ordered. "Send it to all their major communication networks. We will give them 24 hours to accept our terms." On Earth, Admiral Park Ji-woo sat in the command center of the Global Space Defense Initiative, a secret organization that had been formed 30 years earlier. The world's governments had finally agreed on one thing when they detected the first alien signals. Humanity needed to be ready. Park was 53 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many late nights. He had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment, hoping it would never come. Now, as he watched the incoming message decode on his screen, he felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," said Lieutenant Kim So-ra from the communications station. "It's using basic mathematical sequences to establish a translation protocol. They want us to understand them." The reeded caper said, "1 C that 1 C, 1 C RNC. "Put it on screen," Park ordered. The message was simple and direct. The Vectar Dominion had claimed Earth as part of their territory. Humanity had 24 hours to surrender completely. All military forces would be disbanded. All governments would submit to Vectar authority. Any resistance would be met with total destruction. The room fell silent as the officers read the message. Some faces showed fear. Others showed anger. Park felt both emotions fighting inside him, but he kept his expression calm. "Get me a connection to the Security Council," Park said quietly. Dr. Sarah Kim arrived at the command center within 30 minutes. She was a specialist in xenopsychology and communication, one of the few humans who had spent years studying the alien signals they had detected. She had helped design the response protocols for exactly this situation. "They think we're weak," Sarah said, as she reviewed the Vectar message. "Their ultimatum follows a pattern we've seen in their previous conquests. They expect us to either surrender immediately or make empty threats." "What do you recommend?" Park asked. Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. "We tell them the truth. All of it." For the next 2 hours, Sarah and her team compiled a data package. It contained humanity's complete military history, from the earliest tribal warfare to the nuclear standoffs of the Cold War. It included detailed accounts of every major conflict, every military strategy, every terrible lesson humanity had learned about war. The package explained how humans had developed the concept of mutually assured destruction. The idea that even if you lose a war, you can make sure your enemy loses everything too. It showed how humans had fought guerrilla wars that lasted decades, how they had rebuilt after devastating losses, how they had developed weapons specifically designed to kill other humans as efficiently as possible. But the most important part of the message was a single paragraph, written in simple language, that the translation protocols would carry perfectly. For all of our history, we have been divided. We have fought each other for land, resources, beliefs, and pride. We have perfected the art of war because we have practiced it on ourselves for thousands of years. We have never united as one species, with one purpose. You have given us that purpose. You have given us a common enemy. We will not surrender. We will not serve. We will fight. And if we die, we will make sure that conquering Earth costs you everything. This is not a threat. This is a promise. This is who we are. Park read the message 3 times before approving it. Send it, he said, finally. The transmission left Earth at the speed of light, racing across space toward the Vectar fleet that waited at the edge of the solar system. It would take hours to reach them. But Park knew the real message wasn't in the data or the words. The real message was in the speed of the response. The Vectar had expected fear and chaos. Instead, Earth had replied in 2 hours with a calm, organized, detailed answer. It told the Vectar something they hadn't considered. Humanity had been preparing for this. As the message traveled through space, Park looked at the screens showing Earth below. Lights sparkled across the night side of the planet. Millions of cities where billions of people lived their lives, completely unaware of what was coming. Activate all defense platforms, Park ordered. Send the alert to all member nations. As of now, we are at war. Around the world, secret bases came to life. Weapons, systems that had been hidden for decades, powered up. Ships that had been disguised as satellites changed their configurations. Humanity had spent 30 years building defenses in secret, using every trick and deception they could imagine. The Vectar thought they were facing a primitive, divided species. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology. It was the absolute refusal to give up, no matter the cost. Commander Zrel watched the incoming data stream with growing confusion. The human response had arrived far too quickly. Most species needed days to organize a reply, time spent in panic and desperate debate. The humans had answered in hours. They sent us their military history, Officer Krath said, examining the data with his analytical station. This makes no sense. Why would they tell us how they fight? Zrel felt a flicker of unease, but he pushed it aside. It's a psychological tactic. They hope to frighten us with stories of their primitive conflicts. Begin the analysis anyway. We should know what desperate strategies they might attempt. The Vectar analysis computers began processing the human data. Within minutes, the first reports started appearing on the screens around the war room. As the officers read them, the confident atmosphere began to change. Commander, one analyst said slowly, these humans have fought over 16,000 documented wars. Against each other. Impossible, Zrel said. No species fights that much. They would destroy themselves. They nearly did, sir, multiple times. The analyst pulled up more data. They developed nuclear weapons and immediately used them on each other. Then they built enough nuclear weapons to destroy their entire planet several times over. They called it mutually assured destruction. The idea was that if anyone started a war, everyone would die. Krath moved closer to read the reports himself. This can't be accurate. Why would any species threaten their own extinction because they wanted their enemies to know they would never surrender? The analyst explained. They were willing to destroy everything rather than be conquered. And it worked. For 50 years, 2 rival groups aimed enough weapons at each other to end their civilization, and neither side dared to attack. Zrel felt a cold sensation spreading through his body. The Vectar had conquered dozens of worlds, but every species they had faced was fundamentally peaceful. They had fought wars, yes, but small ones. Defensive wars. Wars that ended in negotiated peace when the cost became too high. Humans appeared to have a different understanding of war. Continue the analysis, Zrel ordered. Over the next hour, the reports grew more disturbing. The humans had developed thousands of ways to kill each other. They had fought wars in jungles, deserts, frozen wastelands, and even underwater. They had invented biological weapons, chemical weapons, and weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering. But the technology wasn't what worried Zrel. It was the strategy. They have a concept called total war, another analyst reported. It means they commit everything to winning. Every resource, every person, every possible effort. They don't fight to win battles. They fight to completely destroy their enemy's ability to continue fighting. Look at this, Krath said, highlighting a section of the data. That's more than the entire population of most species we've conquered. And they kept fighting the entire time. Even when their cities were burning. Even when they were starving. They kept fighting. Zrel studied the data about the war Krath had mentioned. The humans called it World War II. The numbers were staggering. The destruction was incredible. But what shocked Zrel most was what happened after the war ended. The humans rebuilt. Within 50 years, they had recovered completely and advanced their technology further than ever before. The nations that had been enemies became allies. The species that had nearly destroyed itself reached for the stars instead. They learn from their wars, Zrel said quietly. They don't just survive them. They become stronger. Sir, there's something else you need to see, the communications officer called out. The end of their message, the personal statement. Zrel read the final paragraph of Earth's response. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that made his skin prickle with instinctive fear. Humans had been divided their entire history. They had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They had never united as one species. Until now. Until the Vectar gave them a reason. They're thanking us, Zrel said in disbelief. We threatened to destroy them, and they're thanking us for giving them a common enemy. Krath's voice was quiet. Commander, every species we've conquered had one thing in common. They were peaceful. They had small militaries. They saw war as a failure of diplomacy. They fought only when they had no choice, and they stopped fighting as soon as they could negotiate peace. And the humans? The humans perfected warfare because they practiced it on themselves for their entire history. War isn't something they reluctantly engage in. It's something they're very, very good at. The war room fell silent. Every officer was reading the data, understanding what it meant. The Vectar had built their empire by overwhelming peaceful species with superior technology and ruthless tactics. They had never faced a species that understood war the way humans did. They're bluffing, Zrel said. But his voice lacked conviction. They have primitive technology. They've never fought in space. They're trying to frighten us with their past. Perhaps, Krath said carefully. But consider this. If they've been fighting each other this intensely for this long, what do they know about warfare that we don't? Zrel wanted to dismiss the concern. The Vectar had plasma weapons, energy shields, faster than light travel. The humans had chemical rockets and nuclear bombs. The technology gap was enormous. But technology wasn't everything. The Vectar had learned that lesson once before, early in their expansion, when they had faced a species that used guerrilla tactics and refused to fight in open battle. It had taken years to pacify that world, and the cost had been high. The humans had an entire section of their data devoted to guerrilla warfare. They had fought dozens of such wars. They had developed strategies, counter-strategies, and counter-counter-strategies. They had written books about it, studied it in schools, and taught it to their soldiers. Sir, we're detecting energy signatures throughout their solar system, the sensor officer reported. They're powering up something. Multiple somethings. Hundreds of energy sources coming online. Defensive platforms? Zrel asked. Unknown. The signatures don't match any technology in our database. Whatever they've built, they've kept it hidden, until now. Zrel made his decision. The humans were clearly more prepared than the intelligence reports had suggested. But that didn't change the fundamental reality. The Vectar had superior technology and 300 years of conquest experience. The humans were still trapped on one world with primitive spacecraft. We proceed as planned, Zrel announced. Prepare the fleet for system entry. The humans want a fight? We'll give them one. And then we'll demonstrate what happens to species that resist the Dominion. But as his officers moved to carry out his orders, Zrel couldn't shake the cold feeling that had settled in his core. He kept thinking about one line from the human message. This is not a threat. This is a promise. This is who we are. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Zrel wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The Vectar fleet entered Earth's solar system with 200 warships, the largest force Commander Zrel had ever assembled for a single conquest. The ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons charged, and shields at maximum power. Zrel stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the blue planet grow larger on the view screen. His analysts had spent days reviewing the human data, and their reports had been disturbing. But reports and reality were different things. The Vectar had superior technology. That fact would decide this battle. All ships report ready for combat, Officer Krath announced. Weapons systems locked on defensive satellites. We can eliminate their orbital infrastructure in the first strike. Not yet, Zrel said. Let them see our fleet. Let them understand what they're facing. Fear is as powerful as any weapon. But as the fleet moved deeper into the system, passing the orbit of Mars, something unexpected happened. The hidden energy signatures that sensors had detected earlier suddenly became visible. Hundreds of platforms appeared throughout the solar system, emerging from behind asteroids and shedding stealth fields. They weren't satellites. They were weapons platforms, bristling with missiles and energy weapons that human engineers had been building in secret for 3 decades. Defensive positions, Zrel shouted. But he was already too late. The humans struck first. Missiles launched from platforms throughout the solar system. Thousands of them, following unpredictable paths that made them difficult to target. They weren't aimed at the fleet's center. They were aimed at the edges, trying to break up the formation. The Vectar point defense systems came online, destroying hundreds of missiles. But there were too many, coming from too many directions. Explosions blossomed across the fleet as missiles found their targets. 3 ships lost their shields. 2 more suffered engine damage. Return fire, Zrel ordered. Destroy those platforms. The Vectar weapons were far more powerful than anything the humans had. Energy beams lanced out across space, turning weapons platforms into clouds of debris. But for every platform destroyed, 2 more appeared, emerging from hiding spots the Vectar sensors hadn't detected. They've hidden weapons throughout their entire system, Krath said in amazement. This must have taken decades to build. Oh, a proximity alarm blared. Zrel watched in shock as a small human ship, barely larger than a fighter craft, accelerated directly toward his flagship. It was on a collision course, making no attempt to evade or defend itself. Destroy it, Zrel commanded. Energy beams struck the small ship, tearing through its hull. But it didn't stop. The pilot kept the engines at maximum, steering the dying craft directly at the flagship's bridge. At the last second, a point defense laser cut the ship in half, sending the pieces tumbling past the flagship harmlessly. Insane, Krath whispered. The pilot had to know it was suicide, but the same thing was happening throughout the battle. Human pilots were deliberately ramming their ships into Vectar vessels. Some were destroyed before impact. Others succeeded, their ships exploding against Vectar shields in bursts of nuclear fire. They're using kamikaze tactics, the tactical officer reported. Like in their historical data, they're trading single pilots for capital ships. Each suicide attack only damaged shields or caused minor hull breaches. But there were dozens of attacks happening simultaneously, and each one forced Vectar ships to divert defensive fire. While the point defense systems targeted the suicide ships, the missiles got through. "Sir, we've lost 40 ships," Krath reported. His voice was steady, but Zrel could hear the shock beneath it. Zrel felt rage building inside him. The humans were supposed to be weak, divided, and technologically inferior. Instead, they were fighting like demons, using tactics that the Vectar had never encountered. "All ships, focus fire on Earth," Zrel commanded. "We end this now. Destroy their major cities." The fleet turned toward Earth, weapons charging for a devastating bombardment. But as they did, more human ships appeared. These were larger, proper warships that had been hiding on the far side of the moon. They weren't trying to engage in direct combat. Instead, they deployed thousands of small objects into the Vectar fleet's path. Zrel's sensors identified them as nuclear weapons, crude by Vectar standards, but deployed in a minefield pattern that would force the fleet to either slow down or risk flying through a field of atomic explosions. "They're trying to slow our advance," Krath said, "giving their planet more time to evacuate or prepare defenses. Then we'll go through," Zrel decided. "Our shields can handle their primitive nuclear weapons. All ships, maximum speed. We'll overwhelm their defenses with pure force." The fleet accelerated into the minefield. The humans detonated every nuclear weapon simultaneously. The explosion was visible from Earth. A brief flash of light in space as hundreds of nuclear weapons created a wall of fire and radiation. The Vectar shields held, but the electromagnetic pulse from so many simultaneous detonations disrupted ship systems across the fleet. Dozens of ships found their sensors blinded, their communications jammed, their weapons temporarily offline, and in that moment of confusion, the humans struck again. More missiles, more suicide ships, more attacks from directions the Vectar hadn't anticipated. The humans were fighting the way they had fought each other for thousands of years, using every dirty trick, every desperate tactic, every bit of knowledge they had gained from their violent history. A Vectar cruiser exploded as a damaged human ship crashed directly into its engine core. Another warship lost power when a missile strike severed its main power conduits. A third ship found itself surrounded by small human craft that attached magnetic mines to its hull before retreating. "They're not trying to win a clean victory," Krath realized. "They're trying to make this as costly as possible. They're willing to trade 10 of their ships for one of ours." Zrel understood the strategy. The humans knew they couldn't win a direct battle. So instead, they were doing everything they could to make the conquest too expensive to continue. They were making the Vectar pay for every meter of space in blood and metal. Another proximity alarm. Zrel saw a larger human ship approaching, already heavily damaged and venting atmosphere. On the communication channel, he heard a human voice, calm despite the chaos. "This is Captain Park Min-seo of the Earth Defense ship Indomitable. I want you to remember this. We could have surrendered. We could have saved our lives. We chose this instead." The ship exploded in a massive nuclear blast that engulfed 2 Vectar destroyers. When the flash faded, both destroyers were gone, and the humans' final words echoed in Zrel's mind. "They're all insane," an officer said quietly. "No," Zrel said. He was beginning to understand. "They're committed. There's a difference." The battle continued for 6 more hours. The humans fought with a ferocity that shocked the Vectar officers. They used tactics that were considered dishonorable by every civilized species. They sacrificed themselves willingly. They turned their own damaged ships into weapons. They never retreated, never surrendered, never stopped fighting. When Zrel finally ordered a withdrawal, the fleet had lost 87 ships, nearly half his force, destroyed by a species that shouldn't have been able to touch them. "Where are we retreating to?" Krath asked. "The outer system," Zrel said. His voice was hollow. We need time to regroup, repair, and request reinforcements. Sir, the Dominion High Command won't be pleased. This was supposed to be an easy conquest. Zrel didn't answer. He was watching the view screen, where Earth still hung in space, defiant and unconquered. The humans had lost more ships than the Vectar, taken more casualties, and suffered more damage to their orbital infrastructure. But they were still fighting, still broadcasting messages of defiance, still preparing for the next battle. For the first time in 300 years of conquest, Commander Zrel felt something he had never experienced before. Doubt. Not doubt about Vectar technology or military strength. Doubt about whether any victory over these humans would be worth the price they would make him pay. As the fleet limped away from Earth, one final message came from the planet's surface. It was Admiral Park Ji-woo. And his message was simple. We told you who we are. Next time, bring more ships. You're going to need them. The news of Earth's resistance spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For 300 years, the Vectar Dominion had conquered world after world, with barely any losses. Now, a primitive species from an unknown system had destroyed nearly half of Vectar fleet. Ambassador Chen Minji stood in the reception area of the Galactic Council station, waiting for her first official meeting with the assembled civilizations. She was 42 years old, a career diplomat who had trained her entire life for contact with alien species. But nothing could have prepared her for the reality of seeing hundreds of different species gathered in one place. The council chamber was enormous, designed to accommodate beings of every size and shape. Some breathed oxygen, others methane. Still others required no atmosphere at all. Translation devices hummed, converting thousands of languages into something each species could understand. Chen wore a simple blue suit, Earth's flag displayed on her shoulder. She carried no weapons, but she knew that 6 human security officers were positioned throughout the station, ready to act if needed. Humanity wasn't taking chances anymore. The council will see you now. A small floating drone announced in perfect English. Chen walked into the chamber. Thousands of eyes, and some organs that weren't eyes at all, focused on her. She felt the weight of their attention but kept her face calm and professional. The council speaker was a being that looked like a collection of glowing crystals floating in a containment field. Its voice resonated directly in Chen's mind through the translation device. Ambassador Chen of Earth, you stand before the Galactic Council to explain your species' actions against the Vectar Dominion. With respect, Chen said clearly. We didn't take action against them. They attacked us. We defended ourselves. A murmur ran through the assembled species. Several ambassadors spoke at once, their voices overlapping until the speaker called for order. The Vectar claim they offered you the opportunity to join the Dominion peacefully, the speaker said. They say you responded with violence. They gave us 24 hours to surrender our entire civilization, Chen corrected. That's not an offer, that's a threat. We responded by showing them that conquering Earth would cost them everything. We were right. Another ambassador stood, a tall being covered in blue fur. Chen's briefing identified the species as Torven, one of the first worlds the Vectar had conquered. You claim to have defeated a Vectar fleet, the Torven ambassador said. Yet the Vectar still exist, still control dozens of worlds. What makes you think this changes anything? Chen had prepared for this question. She activated a holographic display, showing the battle data. We didn't defeat them, she said honestly. We made them retreat. We destroyed 87 of their ships at the cost of most of our orbital fleet. We lost thousands of pilots and soldiers. But we proved something important. She let the battle footage play. The assembled species watched as human pilots deliberately crashed their ships into Vectar vessels. They saw weapons, platforms hidden throughout the solar system. They watched Earth's desperate, vicious defense. We proved that the Vectar can be hurt, Chen continued. We proved that resistance is possible. We proved that even a technologically inferior species can make conquest too expensive to continue. The chamber erupted in noise. Some species argued that Earth's actions would only make the Vectar more brutal. Others debated whether humans were heroes or fools. A few suggested that Earth should be left to its fate for disrupting galactic peace. But Chen noticed something interesting. Several ambassadors were watching the battle footage with a different expression. Not shock or fear, but something else. Something that looked like hope. "The Council recognizes Ambassador Vrel of the Korath," the speaker announced. A reptilian being stood, its scales shimmering in the chamber's light. Chen knew about the Korath. They had been conquered by the Vectar 40 years ago. Their world was strip-mined for resources, their people forced into labor camps. "I have a question for the human," Vrel said. "Your tactics, the guerrilla warfare, the hit-and-run attacks, the willingness to sacrifice for small victories. You would teach these methods to others?" The chamber went silent. Everyone understood the real question being asked. Would humanity help other species resist the Vectar? Chen chose her words carefully. "We would teach any species that wants to learn how to defend itself. We wouldn't do the fighting for them. But we would share our knowledge freely." "Why?" another ambassador demanded. "What do you gain from this?" "Allies," Chen said simply. "We're new to the galaxy. We're technologically behind. We have no natural resources that you can't find elsewhere. But we know how to fight, and we're willing to teach. In exchange, we want allies who will stand with us when the Vectar come back. Because they will come back." Over the next 3 days, Chen met with ambassadors from 17 different species. All of them had been conquered by the Vectar. All of them had accepted subjugation because they believed resistance was impossible. But Earth had changed that calculation. "We tried to fight," Ambassador Vrel explained during a private meeting. "When the Vectar first came to our world, we used our military to resist. They destroyed one of our cities as a demonstration. After that, our government surrendered. We told ourselves we were saving lives. But we were really just accepting slavery." "What would you do differently now?" Chen asked. "Everything," Vrel said. His eyes were bright with something that looked like hunger. "We would use the tactics you used. Hide weapons platforms. Train pilots for suicide runs. Make them pay for every meter of our world. But it's too late for us. The Vectar control our planet completely." "It's never too late," Chen said. "That's one thing humanity learned from our own history. Occupying a world isn't the same as controlling it. If your people decided to resist, really resist, the Vectar couldn't hold your planet. Not if they're busy fighting on multiple fronts." She pulled up a holographic display showing a map of the Vectar Dominion. "They control 47 systems. That means they have forces spread across dozens of worlds. If even 3 or 4 of those worlds started serious resistance movements, the Vectar couldn't suppress them all." "You're talking about coordinated rebellion," Vrel said quietly. "Yes," Chen agreed. "It would. We're offering to help with all of that." Within a week, Chen had established secret contacts with resistance groups on 6 different Vectar-controlled worlds. Humanity began transmitting encrypted files containing guerrilla warfare tactics, instructions for building improvised weapons, and psychological warfare strategies. But the most important thing Earth provided wasn't information. It was proof that resistance was possible. 3 weeks after Earth's battle with the Vectar, the first rebellion began on a world called Korath Prime. Workers in the resource mines suddenly turned their industrial equipment into weapons. Hidden weapons caches that had been prepared over months were opened. Resistance fighters used hit-and-run tactics that the Vectar occupying forces weren't prepared for. Within days, 2 more worlds followed. The rebellions were small, scattered, and poorly equipped. But they were happening. Species that had accepted subjugation for decades were suddenly fighting back. The Vectar responded with brutal force, but that only made things worse. Images of Vectar atrocities spread through secret channels. More species joined the resistance. The Dominion found itself fighting on multiple fronts for the first time in its history. Back at the Galactic Council, The debate had changed. It was no longer about whether Earth had been right to resist. It was about what role the Council should play in the growing conflict. We should remain neutral, one ambassador argued. This is an internal matter for the Dominion. Neutral, Chen said sharply. She had been invited to address the Council again. You were neutral when the Vectar conquered 47 worlds. You were neutral when they enslaved billions of beings. Your neutrality is why they grew so powerful. Now, species are finally fighting back. And you want to stay neutral again? I. What would you have us do? The speaker asked. Declare war on the Dominion? The Council has never taken military action. I'm not asking you to fight, Chen said. I'm asking you to support the species who are fighting for themselves. Recognize the resistance movements as legitimate. Provide humanitarian aid to refugee populations. Show the galaxy that the Council stands for freedom, not just peace. And if the Vectar retaliate against the Council? Another ambassador asked. Chen smiled. Then, you'll need allies who know how to fight. We're offering to be those allies. The vote took 2 more days. In the end, the Council agreed to recognize the resistance movements and provide humanitarian support. It wasn't a declaration of war, but it was enough. As Chen left the Council chamber, Ambassador Vrel approached her. The Vectar are preparing a final assault on your world, he said quietly. They're gathering their entire remaining fleet. They plan to make an example of Earth, to show the galaxy what happens to species that resist. How long do we have? Chen asked. Weeks. Maybe less. Vrel's scales rippled with what Chen had learned was his species' equivalent of a smile. But you should know something. The resistance movements are planning something too. If the Vectar commit all their forces to attacking Earth, they'll leave their conquered worlds vulnerable. We're going to hit them everywhere at once. Chen felt a surge of hope. Coordinated rebellion. We learned from the best, Vrel said. From a species crazy enough to fight impossible odds and win. As Chen returned to her ship to carry the news back to Earth, she thought about what humanity had accomplished. They hadn't won the war, but they had lit a fire that was spreading across the galaxy. They had taught other species the most important lesson from Earth's violent history. Freedom is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Commander Zrel watched the assembled fleet through the viewport of his flagship. Every Vectar warship that could be spared had been gathered for this assault. 400 ships, the largest military force the Dominion had deployed in over a century. It had taken weeks to assemble them, pulling vessels from garrison duties across the Empire. This is excessive, Officer Krath said quietly. We're leaving our other worlds with minimal defenses. The High Command has made their decision, Zrel replied. His voice was tired. Earth must be destroyed completely. We need to send a message to the entire galaxy that resistance is futile. But even as he spoke, Zrel felt the weight of doubt. The rebellions on 6 worlds had grown stronger, not weaker. The more force the Vectar used to suppress them, the more species joined the resistance. And all of them were using tactics they had learned from Earth. Sir, we're receiving a transmission from Korath Prime, the communications officer reported. The garrison commander is requesting immediate reinforcements. The resistance has captured 3 major cities. Tell him reinforcements are not available, Zrel said. All ships are committed to the Earth assault. Sir, there are also reports of rebellion on Torvek, Sala, and New Vectra. The resistance movements are becoming coordinated. Zrel felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. This was exactly what the humans had predicted. Spread the Vectar forces too thin, force them to choose which battles to fight, and make every victory cost more than it was worth. We proceed as planned, he announced. Once Earth is destroyed, the other rebellions will collapse. They need their symbol of hope. We'll take it from them. The fleet entered Earth's solar system for the 2nd time. But this time, The Vectar were prepared for human tactics. Their ships maintained wider spacing to prevent suicide attacks from hitting multiple vessels. Their sensors were calibrated to detect hidden weapons platforms. Their shields were reinforced against nuclear attacks. Admiral Park Ji-woo watched the Vectar fleet approach on his displays. The orbital defense platforms that survived the first battle were ready, but everyone knew they wouldn't be enough. Not against 400 ships. They learned from last time, Lieutenant Kim Sora said. They're not giving us the same opportunities. Then we'll create new ones, Park replied. He opened a channel to the defense fleet. All ships, execute. Plan Phoenix. Throughout the solar system, human ships that had been hiding began moving. But they weren't attacking the Vectar fleet. They were fleeing. Heading for the outer system at maximum speed. Deliberately drawing the Vectar forces apart. They're running, an officer, on Zrel's bridge, said with satisfaction. No, Zrel said slowly. They're trying to split our fleet. All ships, maintain formation. Ignore the fleeing vessels. Our target is Earth. But even as he gave the order, Zrel saw the trap. If he ignored the human ships, they would attack from behind once his fleet engaged Earth's defenses. If he pursued them, he would split his forces exactly as the humans wanted. He chose to press forward. The fleet would destroy Earth first. Then, hunt down the scattered human vessels. As the Vectar ships approached Earth, the planet's remaining defenses opened fire. Missiles, energy weapons, and nuclear mines created a wall of fire between the attackers and their target. But 400 ships had enough firepower to overwhelm any defense. Vectar plasma beams began striking Earth's surface. Cities burned. Defense installations vanished in massive explosions. The bombardment was systematic and merciless, designed to break humanity's will to resist. But something unexpected happened. Ships began arriving. Not human ships. Alien vessels from a dozen different species, emerging from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They weren't military vessels. They were civilian ships, freighters and transports, barely armed. Sir, we're being hailed, the communications officer said. It's Ambassador Vrel of the Korath. Zrel watched in shock as the alien ships moved between his fleet and Earth. They weren't attacking. They were positioning themselves as shields, deliberately placing their ships in the line of fire. Commander Zrel. Vrel's voice came through. If you want to destroy Earth, you'll have to go through us first. We stand with humanity. Vrel, this is insane, Krath said. They're sacrificing themselves for a species they barely know. No, Zrel realized. They're protecting their hope. If we destroy Earth, we destroy the symbol that resistance is possible. More ships were arriving now. Some were from species the Vectar had conquered. Others were from neutral worlds that had stayed silent for decades. They formed a living barrier around Earth. Hundreds of civilian vessels crewed by beings who had decided that some things were worth dying for. Sir, what are your orders? Zrel stared at the display. He could order his fleet to destroy every ship between them and Earth. The Vectar had the firepower to do it. But the cost would be enormous. Not just in ships and lives, but in the message it would send to the galaxy. The Vectar had built their empire on fear and overwhelming force. But fear only worked when the other side valued survival above all else. These beings were showing they valued freedom more than their own lives. Before Zrel could give an order, new alerts began flashing across his displays. Sir, we're receiving emergency transmissions from the Korath homeworld. The resistance has taken the capital city. They're broadcasting calls for help to other occupied worlds. Round there, Torvek garrison reports they're under full-scale assault. They've lost control of the northern continent. Sala defense forces are requesting immediate evacuation. The rebellion has seized the orbital platforms. The reports kept coming. While the Vectar fleet was committed to attacking Earth, the resistance movements on occupied worlds had launched coordinated uprisings. The timing was perfect. The rebellions had waited until the Vectar had no forces available to stop them. "It's a trap," Kroth said. "Not just a military trap. A strategic one. If we continue the attack on Earth, we lose our empire. If we withdraw to save our conquered worlds, we lose our momentum, and Earth survives as a symbol of resistance." Zrel understood. The humans and their new allies had forced him into an impossible choice. Every option led to failure. "All ships," he said slowly, "cease fire. Withdraw from Earth space." "Sir?" multiple officers said in surprise. "We can't win this," Zrel explained. "Not the way the High Command wants. If we destroy Earth, we lose the Empire to rebellion. If we hold the Empire, Earth survives. Either way, we've already lost." The fleet began its retreat. As they withdrew, Ambassador Chen's voice came through on an open channel. "Commander Zrel, you asked what humanity wanted from the galaxy. Let me tell you now. We want a galaxy where species don't have to choose between freedom and survival, where empires aren't built on conquest and fear, where every being has the right to determine their own future." "Fine words," Zrel replied bitterly. "But the galaxy isn't that simple." "No," Chen agreed. "It's not. But it could be. That's what we're fighting for." The Vectar fleet left Earth's solar system. They returned to find their empire in chaos. Rebellions had erupted on 20 worlds. The Dominion's forces were spread too thin to suppress them all, and every time they defeated one uprising, 2 more began. Within months, the Vectar High Command sued for peace. The terms were harsh. All conquered worlds would be granted independence. The Dominion would reduce its military to defensive forces only. War crime trials would be held for those responsible for atrocities. But the most important term was simple. The Vectar would never again threaten another species with conquest. Admiral Park Ji-woo stood on Earth's surface, watching the sunset over what had been a battlefield. The planet had taken terrible damage in the bombardments, but humanity was already rebuilding. They always did. Ambassador Chen joined him, just returned from the Galactic Council. "The Council has invited Earth to join as a full member," she said. "They're also creating a new organization, the Mutual Defense Alliance. Any species that's attacked will have the support of all member worlds." "That's what we wanted," Park said. "Not to fight alone, but to make sure no one has to fight alone." "There's something else," Chen continued. "A dozen species have asked if we'd help establish a defense academy on Earth. They want to learn not just tactics, but the philosophy behind them. They want to understand why we fight the way we do." Park smiled. "Tell them yes. But make sure they understand the most important lesson. Quote, which is, that the best war is the one you never have to fight," Park said. "We fight so hard because we know what war costs. Every species that learns from us needs to learn that too. Violence should always be the last option, not the first." Over the following years, Earth became a center of galactic defense training. Species from across the galaxy came to learn human military tactics. But they also learned human history. They studied not just the wars humanity had fought, but the peace treaties that ended them. They learned about rebuilding, reconciliation, and choosing cooperation over conflict. The Vectar homeworld went through its own transformation. With their empire gone, they had to learn to exist as equals with other species instead of conquerors. It was difficult, painful, and took decades. But eventually, they too sent students to Earth. On the anniversary of the battle, a memorial was built at the Galactic Council station. It listed every being who had died fighting the Vectar, from the first species they conquered to the last battle at Earth. At the bottom was an inscription in hundreds of languages. "Never forget. Tyranny ends when the oppressed decide they've had enough. Honor those who fought. Remember why they fought. Build a galaxy worthy of their sacrifice." Commander Zrel, now retired and serving as a peace negotiator for his people, stood before the memorial with Ambassador Chen. "I still don't understand," he said quietly. "You had every right to hate us, to demand revenge. Instead, you offered us a path to redemption. Why?" Chen was quiet for a moment. "Because we've been where you are. In our history, we had empires that conquered and enslaved. We had nations that committed terrible crimes. But we learned that cycles of revenge never end. Someone has to be brave enough to break the cycle. And you thought we were worth saving?" "We thought everyone is worth saving," Chen corrected. "That's the difference between being a conqueror and being human. Conquerors see only enemies and subjects. We see potential allies. Everyone deserves a chance to choose a better path." Zrel looked at the names on the memorial. So many dead. So much suffering. All because his people had believed might made right. "I hope we can deserve that faith," he said. "You already are," Chen replied. "By being here. By working for peace. By teaching your young ones that there's a better way. That's all anyone can do." As they stood together before the memorial, ships from 100 worlds arrived and departed from the station. Species that had once been enemies now worked as allies. The galaxy wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still disagreements, still challenges to overcome. But for the first time in galactic history, there was a real chance for lasting peace. Not peace through conquest or intimidation, but peace through choice and mutual respect. And it all started because one species refused to surrender. Because humanity looked at impossible odds and said not, "We can't win, but we can make them regret trying." Earth had been next on their list, but instead of becoming another conquered world, it became a beacon, a reminder that freedom is always worth fighting for, and that the oppressed need only decide they've had enough. The galaxy had trembled, and in the trembling, it had changed forever.